All right, welcome back to Wizard Trails. This is Busted Sleeves, also known as Sean. I'm going to be looking at stress testing a different deck this week. Last week we looked a little bit at Jeskai Fires. With between the holidays, a couple different things, had some issues getting some of the videos uploaded, but got a chance to test those decks out. And I mean, overall the list felt good. The list felt strong. But I think being a very top percentage deck in the format on MTG Goldfish makes it a very targeted list. So this week, what I really want to test is one of the mechanics that have come out recently from Eldraine that I originally didn't have a lot of expectation to, but has turned out to be very extremely strong, which would be the adventure mechanic. So our art right now is the adventure token, that where you send your creature on an adventure by casting the spell portion of the creature. You exile and then you can cast a creature later. It's important to know with the adventure cards, just a good general rule is that they are all creatures anywhere but the stack. So they are immune to cards like duress and those kinds of effects. But if the spell gets countered, the creature doesn't go to exile. So you goes to your graveyard and you no longer get to cast a creature. So sometimes you cast creature side, sometimes you cast the adventure side. But it's just really good modal pieces. In Magic, some of my favorite things are effects like instant speed, effects like Search Your Library 4, and effects that are modal, which is an adventure card, also known as charms in previous sets. So you have like Is It Charm and Azorius Charm, cards where you get choices, and depending on the situation of the game, are normally pretty strong cards, depending on how they're designed. So you're really looking for adventure cards and modal cards that are good at different stages of the game. The traditional stages of the game are either you're behind, you're at parity, meaning you're both in equal board state, nobody's really ahead right now, or you're ahead. And you want your cards to really shine in two of those areas, the strongest areas being behind and parity. When you're ahead, pretty much anything you play, you're ahead. So if you're playing a spell, you're just continuing to be ahead. So you put ownership on your opponent to get out of it. But whenever you are behind or when you are at parity, it's important that you are playing more impactful spells to break that situation. Otherwise, you remain behind and then lose the game, or you remain at parity until your opponent breaks parity. And if your opponent breaks parity, you are now behind. So modal cards, whenever they give you the two options, are really important, really impactful, and so that's the adventure mechanic. That's why it's really a strong mechanic overall. So the stress test we're going to be doing this week is we're going to be looking at a card called Edgewall Innkeeper. It actually does one of my favorite things in the game of Magic, something that I believe Patrick Chapin has talked about a lot in the past, which just says the word draw a card. It's one of the simplest effects that you see frequently while searching your library, or you win the game, an instant, those kind of come and go. Anytime you see a card that says draw a card, traditionally that card is immediately better, especially if it's stapled on something else. So Edgewall Innkeeper itself does not draw a card, but is a 1-mana 1/1, not very impressive, that then says you get to draw a series of cards over a span of time. And that's a really strong effect. So we're going to be stress testing Edgewall Innkeeper in two lists this week. Now we're in a unique situation this week that we actually have both lists pre-planned out, although I have the option to adjust them based off results throughout the week that might adjust way I want to build a list, or maybe a different build of a certain type. I'm going to start with the more fun looking one, the one that plays towards my strengths, which is really tempo and interactive, really looking to break things, and then I'll play the safer build that's been around for a while a little bit later. So let's look at some of the lists. Really what we're looking for is Edgewall Innkeeper. We're looking to play adventure cards because every time I cast a creature spell that has adventure, I draw a card. Now what this means is if I cast the adventure side, I don't draw a card, but if I cast the creature side and it has the word adventure on the card, it is an adventure card, then I get to draw a card as a cast trigger. So they can even respond and kill Edgewall Innkeeper. I'm still going to draw a card and that creature is still on the stack. So even if they counter the creature, it's not about it entering the battlefield, I still draw the card. So it's just a really strong effect. So what we're looking for are strong adventure cards that have valuable plays through different phases of the game and can scale into easy ways to win the game. Because this creature is green, both lists are going to use our typical green adventure cards. We have Beanstalk Giant, Lovestruck Beast. They normally will play some variation of both of these. The Beanstalk Giant, depending on the list, sometimes you don't really need a lot of mana, so you might not run that one, but Lovestruck Beast is actually fairly consistent. It's a card I've actually been playing in Pioneer recently with the Eldrazi builds. Beanstalk Giant is 3 mana sorcery. You search your library for a basic land card and put it onto the battlefield, and then shuffle your library. So it comes into play untapped. So that means if you go turn 3 Beanstalk Giant, I get a forest, I then can play a 1-mana spell such as Lovestruck Beast's Adventure, which is create a 1/1 white human creature token. Neither of these effects are, format warping. Fertile Footsteps is pretty good. Typically Ramp is a good effect to have in Magic, but 1-mana 1/1s that have no other effect are normally not great. What these cards offer are flexibility. Whenever you're playing Magic, the ability to play multiple spells in a turn and to play spells every turn typically puts you in the advantage or at least parity category. The decks that are playing land go and not playing spells traditionally in Magic are behind, because they are not advancing their board state. They're not creating any sort of pressure that your opponent has to react to. They're just sitting and let the opponent play their plan. So what these cards allow us to do is both have an adventure spell that is cheaper than the creature spell. So I'm able to play the adventure side, and then later on when I have the mana, play the creature side, which is pressure based. Beanstalk Giant is just an XX creature where X is number of lands you control. Very vanilla 7 mana XX. A lot of decks play Beanstalk Giant. They're not casting Beanstalk Giant until they've run out of other resources, but theoretically, they're putting themselves in board states to where your opponent is also running out of resources when they play this 7 mana 7/7 or 8/8. It also accelerates a mana towards casting that creature. And then Lovestruck Beast is a 3 mana 5/5, which is an insane value, but it can't attack unless you control a 1/1. The important note there is it allows it to block, so against more aggressive decks, I still have a 3 mana 5/5 that can block all day and typically eat anything. But then if I've played Heart's Desire or I've played Edgewall Innkeeper, I'm now having a 5/5 that can attack. So these are going to be typical inclusions in a lot of your lists that are running Edgewall Innkeeper. Where if I play Edgewall Innkeeper on turn 1, I play another spell on turn 2, and I have Lovestruck Beasts in hand, I don't have to play Heart's Desire. I can just play the 3 mana 5/5, draw a card off Edgewall Innkeeper, and then Edgewall Innkeeper being a 1/1 allows my 5/5 to attack. So I don't always have to cast the Heart's Desire effect. It's important to remember that we have to cast the creature side to get the draw, not the adventure side. So our first list that we're going to look at going into the format, and the reason I think this is a really good position to be in, is you have decks like Fire's Invention. And Fire's Invention has some card advantage, but not a ton of card advantage. So an early Edgewall Innkeeper really gives us a lot of card draw to find interaction for our more broken starts by our Fire's Invention opponents. Also, having a 3 mana 5/5 is really hard for that deck to answer. 3 mana 5/5s are something that can pressure, and unless they have a Teferi bounce, Deafening Clarion does not kill Lovestruck Beast. So we can play Lovestruck Beast and then play another 1/1 later if they Deafening Clarion, so we can attack with our Lovestruck Beast. This deck just has the ability to generate a lot of card churning, whichever shell we go with, through Edgewall Innkeeper, and a lot of value with multiple spells. So it's just a matter of making sure our sideboard is built correctly for decks such as Fire's Invention, that we have the ability to attack that deck, which we get really strong post-board. So our first that we're going to look at is a new one that's been popping up recently. It's really not all over the MTG Goldfish standard results yet, but it's one I played against last week when I was playing the Cavaliers version. I've seen Saffron Olive tweeting about this deck, and it's a pretty interesting deck overall. It plays a shell that's similar to something I've streamed previously, which is a Ralzeric combo deck. But we're looking at a Teamer Reclamation and a Teamer Adventures deck. So this one is going away from Ralzeric and Wilderness Reclamation, and we're just going with all of these adventures. So we have the Fertile Footsteps off the Beanstalk Giant, we have Lovestruck Beast, but then we also have Brazen Borrower, Fae of Wishes, Bone Crusher Giant, and then a new card that's come out of Eldraine, which is called Lucky Clover. And what Lucky Clover does is allows us, anytime we cast an adventure, instant, or sorcery, so it means not the creature side, we can copy and choose new targets. So now Bone Crusher Giant gets to deal 2 damage to 2 different targets if I have a Lucky Clover out. Fae of Wishes lets me search for 2 non-creature spells outside of the game, reveal them, put them in my hand. If I have Lucky Clover out, which is really good for going and getting naturalized effects for Fire's Invention. And then Brazen Borrower allows me to bounce 2 things at instant speed. With the existence of Teferi and with the existence of Fire's Invention, a lot of our opponents have moved away from instant speed interaction. So Brazen Borrower and Bone Crusher Giant have really leaned into that option where they are good without instant attached. But if our opponent doesn't have a Teferi, a lot of our opponents don't have instant speed interaction to stop what we're going for. So the list looks a lot like this one. And really, if you can tell, we're really trying to maximize Edgewall Innkeeper. Down at the bottom, we have 2 Growth Spirals. We have 4 Lucky Clovers, and we have 4 Escape to the Wilds. Outside of that, it is Edgewall Innkeepers and Adventure Creatures. So we're really trying to make sure if we hit an Edgewall Innkeeper, we are drawing cards. We want to draw at least 2 cards off Edgewall Innkeeper because it compensates Edgewall himself and whatever creature we cast into Edgewall. Any card that we cast into Edgewall Innkeeper after that is now replaced, so it's a net 0 play, because if our opponent kills, say, our Brazen Borrower, if we drew a card off Edgewall Innkeeper already, then we really didn't lose a card in the card race. Yes, it might be a land, it might be something else, but we still have a card. Our sideboard gives us a lot of options out of cards like Plain-Wide Celebration, Expansion Explosion, Tamiyo, Tybalt, and we have just a bunch of different interaction pieces that we can go get with Fae of Wishes. Our entire sideboard is non-creature based, so really we have a bunch of silver bullets that we can bring in certain matchups to make sure we aren't losing games. Expansion Explosion is great against slow controlling decks like blue-white. If the door is opened up, we just get to resolve an explosion for a lot. We also have cards like Tameo against green-black decks that have discard spells, or blue-black decks that have Thought Erasure. We have Chandra and Flame Sweep against aggro decks. We just have all these flexible pieces, and the beauty of Wish sideboards, which have recently become prevalent with Karn, Fae of Wishes, Mastermind's Acquisition, Vivian, is that we have access to all these cards in our Game 1 slot. So if we're built correctly, we should always have average to decent games game 1, and then we make proper sideboard decisions in games 2 and 3 to take one of those games down. So this is what it looks like we're going to be playing on Monday night as our first list. The deck looks right up my alley. A lot of value play, a lot of tempo play, a lot of modal flexibility, and I'm all about those kinds of effects because it really allows me to enable myself the best opportunity to leverage plays for win. The other way you can build this list, which is what we're looking at possibly playing on Thursday, is the black-green version, the traditional black-green version. So we have cards like Foulmire Knight, Order of Midnight, Murder Strider, and we still have Lovestruck Beast. These are more just mid-range interactive cards. They all represent some type of card advantage. Foulmire Knight draws a card, Order of Midnight returns a creature from our graveyard to our hand, Murder Strider removes a problem. So none of them dirtle. They all represent very clear advantages. And then the backside are just clear advantaged creatures. So this would be the green-black list with Edgewall Innkeeper, and it's just your traditional green-black deck. And really it's leaning our cards like Rankle, Questing Beast, and a variety of green-black planeswalkers to pressure your opponent with just the best rare and powerful cards you could possibly play. So we're going to look at playing some version of this list on Thursday. And the reason we're pushing this list to Thursday is this is a more known and popular quantity with a lot of pro players. So with the Mythic Championship 7, I believe, that's happening in California this week, hopefully we'll start to see some of these lists posted up. We might find a more tuned version that might have things we want to do differently. For example, Vivian Arcbow Ranger isn't a card I super love in this list. It does option making our smaller creatures threatening or making removal spells out of our creatures by fighting, but I would love to find a more oppressive and pressure-based card than Vivian Arcbow Ranger. This deck specifically took a loss with the loss of Once Upon a Time in the standard format. So I'm interested to see kind of how some of these lists are built. But at the end of the day, we're still playing Edgewall Innkeeper, which is saying I get to play modal spells to let me choose the pace of my play, and these modal spells can draw me cards. So it's just a very grindy, value-based deck. So this is what we're looking at playing on Thursday. Again, I think these decks are very well positioned as we move into the standard format. I think they have enough interaction versus Fire's decks to not necessarily lose to the combos very easily, while also having card advantage and modal decisions that allow them to stay alive versus more controlling decks like blue-white that some other decks might be struggling to face. So that's kind of the logic behind these decks. But make sure you follow me on Twitter and on Twitch at Busted Sleeves, and you hit the sub below. We're streaming this list on Mondays and Thursdays. So Monday will be Teamer, Thursday will be Form of Green-Black, and it will be at 8 p.m. Pacific Time, 10 p.m. Central. A little bit of a later stream to make sure that you're able to jump in if you're watching other viewers or if you have other things going on that night. You're able to jump in. We'll do about 2.5 hours where we're streaming these lists and really just trying to test them out and identify as we prepare for Grand Prix Oklahoma City and Grand Prix Portland, what deck are we looking at playing for those weeks. But yeah, definitely thank you very much for jumping in and watching. Hopefully you're excited to see how these lists work out. And if you have other pieces you want to see stress test in future weeks, make sure to let me know in the comments below or on Twitter, or jump into the chat on Twitch and just kind of let me know what you're thinking.